Okay, hello guys, and welcome back to Founders Talk from Temi, an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. As you can see, guys, new guest with us today, Kyle Racki, CEO of Proposify. I got that right ahead of that time. Just before we came on air, I had a not quite correct kind of pronunciation. Kyle, help me here. So let us know a little bit about what you're doing at Proposify before we go into your background, or before we go into everything that you're doing. So tell us.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Matt. My name's Kyle Racki, CEO and co-founder of Proposify. And essentially what we do is when sales teams are growing, they often struggle with consistency in their proposal process and delivery. Usually reps are kind of running their own playbook and, maybe sending the wrong things or sending documents that are off brand. So essentially Proposify helps businesses get control over their proposals, quotes, contracts, so that they can send out accurate and on-brand proposals and get more visibility. That's essentially what we do at the end of the day.
So you've been going quite a long time there at Proposify now, 9 years, I believe, over 9 years. Yeah. Tell me, Kyle, when do you stop calling yourself a startup?
That's a good question. So I'm still thinking of us as a startup in a lot of ways, because even though we're at around the 10 million or so revenue mark, I feel like we're a new company. And it's kind of weird when you've been building a business for 10 years, because the way things felt at the beginning and the way they feel now are very different, but in a lot of ways the same. So yeah, I feel like our goal is to get to 100 million and beyond. So if we go by that comparison, we are a startup. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, a lot of people will still consider startups to be scale-ups once they've raised a certain round of funding or hit a certain revenue mark. So I don't think there's a right answer here.
Is it kind of startup is the mindset of how you're managing, how you're building a company, do you think?
I think so, yeah. Because I think of some really large businesses that still kind of operate like startups. I think Amazon is a good example of that, when, business that's been around for 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. But you think of and I'm kind of thinking more in the Bezos era, so I'm not sure the last couple of years what's really been going on there. But if you think of the products that they've innovated and the categories they've moved into, they've never stayed still, and they've always very much operated like a startup.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, let's go back into the world of everything, Kyle, for a second. So Kyle, tell me something about you, which the audience may not necessarily know. They Google your name. What is something interesting about you that not many people know?
Probably a couple things I could mention, but I think one that catches people unaware sometimes is that I grew up in a very tightly controlled cult, and actually did a lot of knocking on doors throughout most of my early life, and was escaped it essentially in my late 20s, and sort of had a whole change in my personal belief system. So that sometimes surprises people. Wow.
Okay. We will definitely dive into that a little bit further, because that may have been interesting to how it's shaped your approach of managing as well, and working with your startup. Okay, Paul, walk me through it. So right from the beginning, how did the idea come about, Proposify? How did it come about?
So I'm a designer by trade background. That's what I went to school for in my early 20s, and was working in agencies throughout my early career. I was one of those junior designers that the agency puts on a proposal, and through the course of doing that, trying to lay it out, make it look nice, because it was a very big contract that the agency was going after, I noticed a lot of inefficiencies, I would say, with the process. Back in that time, it was before Dropbox and sort of cloud storage. So we were using CDs to pull off old work that we wanted to use as case studies. And around that time, Basecamp had just come out, and we were all everybody was moving towards that because it was easier to use, and you could pay through credit card by subscription. You didn't have to have software shipped. So sort of in the earlier SaaS days. And I thought, well, if there's a Basecamp for project management, there should be one for proposals. And that was the seed of the idea as far back as, mid 2000s. But I sat on that idea for a long time. I kind of had little wireframes and little UIs that I developed in my basement. But it wasn't until years later that I would start to really focus on and pursue that idea.
Okay. So tell me, with that idea, you have a co-founder, Kevin. Tell me, how did you find each other? How did this partnership match and work from the beginning?
Kevin and I are very much opposites in a lot of ways. He's 20 years my senior, so I met him in my early to mid 20s. We were working at an agency. He was a biz dev guy, so he was doing sales for the agency. I was the designer, and we hit it off quite a bit. And in fact, I would say he was helpful in helping me deprogram from that kind of cult that I was in. So we formed a bond quickly and a friendship. And actually, the first 5 years of our business partnership, we were running and building an agency together. We'd left the one that we were at, started our own, we called it Headspace. And that was my first entry into the world of business and just trying to figure it out and making a ton of mistakes. We were just building websites and apps for people. But eventually we got burnt out from that and really wanted to pursue a product idea with subscription revenue. So tried a whole bunch of different ideas while we were running the agency, and through some course of sheer luck, we managed to roll Proposify out of the agency and sell it and just double down and focus on that starting around 2013, 2014.
Tell me a little bit about the difficulties of finding a partnership for your founder, your co-founder. For the listeners that are starting their journey now, what should they be looking out for when they're looking for their co-founder? You obviously hit it off with Kevin right from the beginning and you were able to make it work. What is the recipe to make a partnership, a co-partnership work?
It's a great question. And because I met Kevin so young, I think it was 23 or 24, I almost feel like those people who, meet their high school sweethearts at 16 and end up married for, the rest of their lives. So I don't have a ton of perspective because I didn't have a lot of other business partners, or actually any business partners to be more precise. So all I know is my own experience with Kevin. And I would say that it's either way, it was scary at first. It's scary to share a bank account, to trust somebody, to make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain. But you really just don't ever know until you start working together. And unfortunately, a lot of partnerships don't last, or they burn out quickly. But Kevin and I have been lucky to have made it last over 15 years in two different businesses. So it's been a long time. But I would say, for somebody starting out trying to look for a co-founder, I would look for one that and you really believe has the drive and the ambition and the passion to see it through. If they haven't run a business before, that's what I'd be a little bit worried about, because you don't know if they're going to really just know how hard it is. And for most people out there who don't run businesses, when times get tough, what do? You quit and you go find another job. You can't really do that in a business. So I would look for somebody with like tenacity, or you've seen them really just see through hard times. That's a pretty good indication they're going to be a business partner. And I'd also look at somebody with a complementary skill set. So if, you see this sometimes, let's say like design agencies would have two designers running it, or you'd have, a software startup with two development co-founders who both are coding. It can work. There's no hard rules in any of this, but personally, I would rather, if you're a developer building a startup, find somebody who's great at sales and marketing. Or if you're a design agency, find somebody who's great at say, sales or operations.
Otherwise, you have to bring someone in, or you have to learn it yourself.
That's true. And, down the road, you can always hire for skills you don't have. But I think the big thing is the stepping on toes. That's what happens a lot in business partnerships. If you're both developers, well, then not only is somebody not thinking about sales and finance and raising money and all the other things that you have to do, but you're both going to have different opinions on how you write code and what the tech should look like. And that's just a real distraction when you're trying to move fast. You can't have two cooks in the kitchen. One should be the cook and one should be front of house serving the customers.
Okay, tell me, you were speaking there about you and Kevin were creating some things at the beginning, trying to work on some things before you went into product. When you were doing this, obviously you had other roles, you had other occupations at the time. Is when you're building a startup, is it something you have to go head deep in, just give up everything that you've got and go for it? Would it have worked better if you did that? Or do you think the approach is kind of a more safer approach where you keep your job until you see it's going to work?
In the case so for Kevin and me, we took a little bit of a different path. So I had been working on my own clients for about a year. So I was working as a full-time designer at an agency, but then I was also spending evenings and weekends with my own clients and building websites and that kind of thing. So I took that kind of safer approach. And I had a family and I had little kids. I just had my first son who was a newborn. So I couldn't take the risk of just, going out and taking a shot in the dark. And then later Kevin joined me and then we started Headspace and we already had enough clients to at least keep ourselves going. Same thing for really the startup or the product business. Proposify we had the agency. That was our full-time job. And we were kind of building the products on the side and testing them out and getting them in front of customers. So I have never just gone all in right at the beginning. And I don't even think that's a good idea for most people. I think what you want to do, because any company is going to take some amount of time to get off the ground. Usually we start with a thesis or a hypothesis where we go, hey, we think this market needs this product or this service. But it's going to take some amount of time for you to prove that out. And you're going to be wrong. Something is going to be wrong. Either the product doesn't deliver the value you promise, or customers are expecting a different feature that maybe you haven't thought of. And what you really need at the beginning is the time to experiment and try things and talk to customers while you're not worried about paying your rent or your mortgage. So I always recommend people play it safe at the beginning. Once you know that what you're building is valuable and and your customers are growing and you're starting to get too busy to even work on your full time, that's when you need to take a bit of a leap of faith. Even if the business doesn't yet support your lifestyle, at some point you have to jump off the cliff and just trust that there will be something to catch you on the other side.
Oh, a big jump and big leap of faith. Okay, tell me, Kyle, a little bit more about those beginning stages. Tell me a little bit more about the MVP. How did the initial MVP look like?
I like to say that it was put together with duct tape and bubble gum. It was very ugly, very non-functional, but it was enough to start pitching to people, start doing demo days, get into the offices of some companies and show them what we were building and get their feedback. I would treat things differently today, knowing what I know now. But at the time, we were trying a whole pile of different ideas, and we were kind of making the classic mistake that, young founders make, or people who are very close to the code or the design, is just building because you enjoy the building before you're really getting it in front of people and talking to people. It took longer than it probably could have taken had I built less and talked to more people.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the key things I hear on this show the most of the time is speak to your audience, speak to your markets. You won't, you're going blind otherwise. You're driving blind if you don't speak to your audience. Okay, Kyle, talk to me a little bit more about the challenges which you have faced over the last 9 years. 9 years is obviously quite a long time to have kept your startup, then your business now going. What have been the challenges over the last kind of 9 years, the biggest ones that have come up?
Biggest is key because there's so many challenges. I don't know if you'd have time on the show to go through them all. But, I think what happens when you're building a startup is, you're just trying to not run out of money. That's what the whole game is the train is barreling behind you and you're just laying down the tracks and hoping you don't stop for a second because the train's going to hit you or you're going to run out of money. Eventually, if you're lucky enough to find traction and the market wants what you're selling, and now suddenly it becomes a demand issue. The demand is high enough that you're actually in a pretty good place. And we hit that, I think around end of 2014 was when we started to go from 2 customers a month and 3 and 4 and then back to 2. And we were just kind of not growing at all to suddenly we're doubling customers every month and revenue was doubling. So once that starts to happen, it becomes a whole different set of challenges that you face. And those challenges are going to last hopefully a lot longer than, the initial challenges. Because if you're playing the long game, the time horizons are just longer and you're going to face a lot more challenges. The challenges tend to be basically the same thing, which is the founder is only limited by their own growth and their own mindset and their own set of beliefs. usually that's the thing that has to upgrade along the way. Because the fact is, whatever business you're in is going to change constantly. The new competitors will enter, customer expectations will change. You're always going to be faced with the problem of building value and growing revenue. But what tends to hold most people back, most founders, is just their own self-limiting beliefs. They don't believe that they should grow, or they don't believe that they're good enough to grow, or those are the things that you actually need to, work with the coach or work with a community and help yourself unlock, because once you kind of have that tweak in mindset, that's when the growth tends to happen. And the thing that comes up the most, and probably the one that I coach founders the most on, is your leadership team. So as you grow, none of it is really about you, this CEO. You're responsible for the vision, setting the direction, and building the team, but really it's your leadership team that's going to grow the business. So if you're finding that you're not growing, you're finding that just things are going off the rails, it's almost always a people problem. But the thing that holds a lot of founders back is they go, oh, well, Jimmy, who I started the company with, who's my first hire, who, leads the engineering team or the marketing team, everybody loves Jimmy. I love him. We're best friends. We hang out on the weekends. They really need to make the call. You got to layer somebody in over Jimmy, or you got to get Jimmy out and find somebody else. And that's probably the most effective change that you can make as the CEO, but the one that most of them just hold off and resist for sometimes years, and it costs them years of time and opportunity.
So most definitely better action than inaction. When you have these feelings, act on it, as quick as possible, because something's not right. Tell me a little bit more about your experience here. So this is from what I've seen from doing a bit of background research on you, this is your first position as a CEO, as a C-level executive. 9 years, so obviously experienced, a huge amount of experience behind you. But how did you go from having no experience as a C-level executive into a huge position where you have all that pressure, so many more hats that you have to wear? What would be the advice you would give other listeners which haven't made that step yet?
Well, CEO is a funny position, right? Because nobody really earns the title unless they've already done it somewhere else. So if you're someone like Frank Slootman, who's the CEO of Snowflake, he's a hired gun CEO. He just comes into businesses that are already at 50 million and takes them to $1 billion plus in revenue. Only so many people in the world can do that. The vast majority of them are CEOs more or less by inheritance, if you will. Okay. So we didn't have a CEO job title to speak of, but at some point we raised money early on and they needed a board set up and they needed somebody named CEO. I took it because I had the vision for the product and the business. But it really is a meaningless title at the beginning. You've got 3 people working for you and you're the CEO. Who cares, right? You're still handling support tickets and buying beer for the team. But at some point, that title starts to mean something. And I don't know exactly what point that is, but eventually you're going to have a team that reports to you, and then more people in the company actually don't report to you. And now suddenly that CEO title starts to carry some weight, and you don't feel it yourself because you still feel like that, guy or gal buying beer and handling support tickets, but everybody else sees you now as the scary person, the one that they're afraid to talk to and who they feel like might fire them on the spot. And so I think it's when you're getting to that stage, it's where you need to really get coaching or learn or read books, and probably all of those things, because you need to learn how to effectively lead through your executive team, and you need to communicate to the business in a way that inspires people and gets them aligned and understanding where you're going and what you want to do. That's just frankly really hard. The CEO position is a unnatural position. It's not, you have to be willing to make people upset. Sometimes, you can't have everybody be happy with you if you want to have a growing business. And most people just aren't geared for that level of conflict and the level of, really pushing people hard and pushing them outside of their comfort zone. That's required if you want to be a good CEO.
Tell me a little bit more about that educational side of what you just said. So you said you need to make sure you do the training and do the books. What would be your advice? What would be your top book for those looking to be a better CEO, a better leader?
A book that I go back to a lot, and there's a lot that have helped shape me. But I would say The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz is one that I just repeatedly go back to and almost use it as a reference guide, if you will. I always say to people, if you see The Hard Thing About Hard Things on my desk, there's some crazy shit's going to go down, because, there's a chapter on how to demote a loyal friend, how to, fire an executive, how to do layoffs the right way, all the worst possible things that you will go through at some point in time during your journey as a CEO. Ben Horowitz has laid out his way of doing it and his experiences. And it's a very cathartic book, but also a very practical book. So I go back to that one a lot. And also I've referenced Frank Slootman. He has a good book called Amp It Up. That's very good as well. But I would say that anything that is in this book here, you can listen to a podcast by Frank Slootman and understand his way of thinking, which is very much that idea of raising the expectations, compressing timelines, pushing people hard. That's how he goes from 50 million to $1 billion. And it's not for everyone, but if you want to grow, that's how you need to be.
Are you saying that if you want to be as successful as Frank, if you want to be a successful CEO, you have to be quite ruthless with your employees, with the people working for you? Where is the line? Where is that line to find that ruthlessness with that understanding of obviously mental health and all of these things now?
Yeah, great topic. Ruthless might be, I wouldn't use that word per se, but I think there is an element to that, which is not being afraid to push people, make them uncomfortable, sometimes tell them bad news. In a lot of these ways, people will actually trust you more, I find. So for example, let's say telling the truth or telling it like it is. You might stand up in front of your all hands, your town hall meeting, and tell the whole company, we're behind, we're not hitting our targets, this isn't going well, this isn't going well. That is needed. But actually, if you don't tell people the truth, if you don't tell people the hard things, if you're not transparent, I find it leads to mistrust. People kind of know when you're sugarcoating or when you're being, what they call now toxic positivity. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there's an element of be empathetic, be an empathetic leader who cares about people and wants the best for people. And I think that when we look at our, maybe some of our idols like Steve Jobs, he was absolutely missing that empathetic side. But what I respect about Steve Jobs, and I think the reason he was able to achieve what he did in his life, was he would raise the expectations very high and allow people to do work that they didn't think was possible. Mm-hmm. And so I do think there's a way to have both. But if you're just purely indexing for making people feel good about themselves all the time, you're not going to see it in your P&L. And frankly, you're not going to attract very good people to your organization.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with a good friend this morning. She's very successful in Ukraine. She's got quite a few businesses. And obviously, we've got war in Ukraine as well, added stress. She works a lot. And someone said to her, I need to take some holiday. I'm tired. I need to take some holiday. Just 7 days. Give me 7 days. And she said, you've been working for me 5 months. I need holiday too. We all need holiday, but I haven't got time for this at the moment. If you want to go, then I can find someone else for the position. And I said to her, is that good leadership? And she said, probably not, but it's who I am as a leader and it's how I make things happen. My business is thriving. And it was kind of that reminder of kind of like Steve Jobs, the same kind of idea of this, the standard is so high and everyone is, you can always find a different employee. Someone doesn't want to do it, but there is that balance. So you definitely don't agree with it. If someone needs some time out, you need time out.
Okay. What I would care about is what are they doing in the time they're not on vacation? So what I would be concerned about is, what are people doing in the time that they're working with you? Because, frankly, I don't care about people's time off. I expect and I trust employees that if they're working for you, they know how to manage themselves. They're not going to, if they take a sick day or a personal day or want to spend a week or 2 weeks on vacation, fully support that. What are they doing in the time they're working with you? And if they're working hard and they're getting results, they should be able to have full autonomy to work when and how they please.
Mhm. Okay. Just a last question for you. So, in regards to what you're doing at Proposify, tell me, are you happy with this year's success so far? And another question on the back of that, what would you like our listeners to remember about Proposify? What would you like their lasting thoughts to be?
Well, this year has been tough for many businesses, SaaS included. So we haven't seen the growth that we'd seen in previous years. I don't think most or really any, especially if you look at the public SaaS companies out there, very few, if any of them, are achieving historical growth. This is very much a year to reset in a lot of ways, reflect, look at what do you do best, what is your core business, cut a lot of the things that aren't serving you. So I would say from that perspective, I'm happy with a lot of things about how my business is going today. We're getting more more efficient, I should say, cash efficient, heading towards break even because we have raised money in the past from investors. And I think we're set up for success in the coming years. But if you look at purely in terms of top level growth, I'm not happy with where we're at, and I don't think a lot of the founders that I speak to aren't either.
Mm-hmm. And what would you like that lasting thought to be about Proposify? What would you like our listeners to remember about the company?
I mean, as far as what the product does, I don't know if it matters unless people are sort of in that market using, sending out proposals and growing a sales team. But I would say that what we've tried to do at Proposify since we've started is be a company with personality. You see that reflected in a lot of our advertising, our language, a very human company. So we're known as having amongst the best support in the industry amongst our competitors. We go above and beyond for our customers, and that very much was baked in to the culture early on. Customer happiness specialist was foundational. And we also try to share our knowledge. So, not just myself, but anybody in the business, in the company gets on podcasts, writes blog posts and just shares what we learn. So that is the kind of company and the kind of culture we're building at Proposify.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to pick your brain and to see everything that you're doing at Proposify. And I wish for the rest of the year a successful close to the year, and success for the future. And hopefully we will link up in the future and see that success thriving.